Hello and welcome to the Mighty Oak Show. Glad to have you with us today. Another great interview for you. But before we jump into that, if you are joining us perhaps for the first time, you stumbled upon us or someone sent you a link, thank you for watching. Really appreciate it. If you have not yet, though, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. We have a lot of content on this channel, and we would love to share that with you. So subscribe and then hit that notification bell. That lets you know when more content comes online. And in addition to the Mighty Oak Show, we have about 4 different shows that we produce, and we put those on this channel, as well as just a lot of other content from our programs, and even share some content from other places. And all of it is intended to be helpful to you. So please take some time to subscribe, hit the notification bell. If you like what you're seeing, give it a thumbs up. That would be great. And comment on it, share it out. And that helps us, and hopefully that helps you. That's the purpose of all of this. And really glad to have you with us, and thankful for your time. Today, I'm interviewing Aaron Spatz. Aaron is coming to us virtually, but looking forward to a great conversation. Aaron is a man of many talents. Started as a United States Marine, now runs a media business, and in addition to that, works a great deal in the veteran community. And one of the things, if you watch this show often, that you hear us talk about often, is the fact that veterans, just generally speaking, regardless of service or time of service or whether or not they deployed to combat, it doesn't really matter that much. Veterans have so much to offer to our country and our communities. And yet, many times, veterans will come home or separate out of the military and have a really difficult time getting their feet underneath them, trying to figure out what to do next. And we do our best to highlight folks who have served in the military, separated from the military, and really moved on in a meaningful way and continue to give back. And Aaron is one of those guys. So Aaron, thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
Absolutely, Jeremy. Pleasure.
And you have a podcast, so I anticipate you doing a lot of talking today. So that's what I'm counting on. 2 guys who have their own podcasts. We'll do our best. Aaron, tell us first, and love hearing stories. Start, if you would, kind of in the beginning, your childhood, the type of home that you grew up in, and then how you ended up in the military. I am always fascinated by the path that people take to get into the military. So why don't you start there, and we'll jump off in that place.
Pleasure. Yeah, no, so my story began really since I could probably walk. My father was a career sailor. He did 20 years in the Navy before retiring as a senior chief. And so I got to see the military lifestyle firsthand. It was just a part of our family culture. It was really nothing. I didn't know anything other than a military lifestyle. And so had a great opportunity to travel overseas, got to see and got to do a lot of really neat things. But one memory that really stuck out at me, we were stationed in Rota, Spain, for about 3 years. And during that time overseas, the Marine Corps Security Forces detachment there in Rota held it was like a Teen Marine Week, little promo event. It was it was like 2 or 3 days long. And I remember I came back from that, and I was squaring off every corner in my house. It was sir, yes, sir, and ma'am, yes, ma'am. Right. And it really left a huge impression on me. We PT'd, we got in the training tank. We did a lot of really, really cool things, in addition to getting woken up by the sound of trash cans. And it left a very sizable impression on me in a positive way.
That's cool.
And so we came back, and my father retired. We decided to move to the landlocked state of Utah. Wow. And wow. Quite the move. Yeah, just a little bit. And so, but it was while we're out there, I decided that I wanted to pursue the Naval ROTC option. Pursued that route actually initially as a naval officer, and it was after a couple of those initial summers, and I just told my dad, I'm like, look, love the Navy, but I gotta make the jump over to the men's department, and so went ahead and put a change of option package together, got that blessed off, and then I was shipped off to OCS, and so that's kind of how that got going.
Yeah, that's crazy. I was when I was 14 years old, I went through a program called Devil Pups. Are you familiar with Devil Pups at all?
No.
So it's similar to what you were describing. It's kind of like a faux boot camp for teenagers, and at the time it was all teenage boys. I think it's boys and girls now, but they kind of pitched it as it's an opportunity to invest in young men and to train them up and teach them character. Really, it was a big recruiting tool. They had me after that, right? So you see that, and you're like, I'm never going back.
No,
yeah, that's crazy.
I mean, those little things make a huge impression, and I also remember that first summer going through Courtramid, which is the Navy ROTC. You in between your freshman and sophomore year, you spend a week with the Navy Air Wing, a week on a ship, a week on a sub, and then you spend a week with the Marine Corps. And and once again, it just kind of reinforced and scratched that itch that I had that I had experienced years earlier.
How did your dad respond to you deciding to go in the Marine Corps?
You know, they were both my father and mother both were super supportive of me, and they were pretty dang proud. And I still remember it like it was yesterday, but you remember the first salute sequence there when you get commissioned. And so my father had been out of the Navy now probably, I don't know, 5 years. And I mean, let's just say he wasn't necessarily in PFT shape, but he got himself in PFT shape and decked out in his choker whites and was able to render my first salute at my commissioning.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
While you served as a Marine, you were an artillery officer and had a year-long deployment. I think you said to Iraq, Afghanistan. Talk about that deployment a little bit.
Sure. That deployment came in a very unique way, and I just see it as God's hand continuing to guide my every step. I had initially thought about going the infantry route. Decided not to do that. I thought, well, I can double down my chances of going forward by going the field artillery officer route, because you either deploy with the battery or you deploy with an infantry battalion. So I'm just thinking, wow, I double my chances. And as timing would have it, by the time I got to the fleet, the unit I got assigned to, they just come off a MEU. We're in post-deployment leave. And basically, it was that unit's turn to go to the back of the line. And so I knew my chances of going overseas were pretty much zero. I was fortunate enough to do a couple weeks over in the Republic of Georgia. And then at a battalion function at the battalion CO's house, he pulled me aside and said, "Hey, Spatz, I got a deal for you. I'm going to get you to Afghanistan, but it may not be the way you want to go." And I just told him, at this point, I'm willing to do almost whatever it takes. And so I was able to deploy with 2nd MAR Div. I was a part of the headquarters group, deployed as a fires officer with 2nd MAR Div forward. So I spent basically the entirety of 2011, February 2011 to February 2012, really acting like as a liaison between the ground element and the air element, and making sure that we could prosecute missions in a safe way without blowing our own aircraft out of the sky. And had a great time. It was a long deployment. 7 days, 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. So, but it was great.
Were you married at the time?
Yeah, my wife. We've been married now, coming up on 12 years, and she's been with me every step of the way, literally from day zero. So
yeah. I think one of the things we forget, I was going to say one of the times, one of the things that we forget is when we're deployed, and I wrote about this a little bit a while ago. I'll talk about my own experience. I can't tell you what you were doing. Sure. Yeah. But when I was deployed, I had a couple of deployments, and every time I was deployed, I saw the world very much from my point of view as the deployed person. And I never felt sorry for myself. I enjoyed it. I loved doing what I was doing, but I rarely thought about what my wife and my kids and my family back home were doing. And it's easy for us to overlook, particularly a year-long deployment, to overlook our family and all that they're dealing with without us at home. It's a crazy thing, and I don't think we pay enough attention to that.
No, it's it takes a toll on the family for sure. And we're fortunate during that year. We just decided, hey, why don't you spend that year with your parents and get around a solid support structure and it doesn't get any better than family. And so we went ahead and made that call just because it was going to be so long. So yeah.
I think for a lot of us that have deployed, particularly combat deployments, the world as we know it and as we see it is viewed from the perspective of those deployments, and not to say that our identity is necessarily found in those, but you just look at the world different when you deploy, particularly to a combat area or to a very poor third world country where they're trying to deal with other things, just surviving. Did being there, and particularly being there for so long, did that change your view on other things in your life?
I definitely, it definitely caused me to look at things actually from a more macro level, believe it or not. So when I came back from the war effort, Jeremy, it really challenged my perspective of, one, what the heck are we doing over there? Right. And two, just the impact of what it makes on thousands of people. Because you have to remember, when I was there, being there for a year, we got to see unit after unit come in and leave. There was even a few units that were leaving 2 weeks, like there was a few units when we arrived, were leaving 2 weeks after we arrived, but they had already come back before we actually completely moved. Wow. So some of these people we saw more than once, and had the opportunity to sit down with a congressional delegation that was making a road trip overseas, and they were asking some of these questions about what impact do you think this has on the long term. And I wanted to say, that's what we pay you for. Tell us what the policy is. Figure it out. But they asked a really great question, was, is the things we're doing over here worth it? Are we spending our money wisely? They were with the Congressional Budget Committee. And I was very quick to challenge them and just make the point of, we need to be very judicious in how we spend money, especially when it comes to people that may not be a true ally of the United States. And so I realized that may not have been your question, but I kind of took it down a slight rabbit trail there.
Well, it causes you to look at things differently, for sure. This is neither here nor there, but since I have found that every combat deployment, every combat veteran is a national security expert. At least that's how people treat people who have deployed. Having spent a year there, what's your take on the most recent peace treaty?
Oh my gosh, you really are going there, and I'm definitely not a national security expert. Go ahead. We can act like I'm a Fox News columnist and make my regular guest appearances. No, the peace treaty I think is a waste of time. I think it's a great idea. I think the gesture is well made. I believe the heart is in the right place, but the execution is such a complex issue. Right. I'm not going to pretend to have the answers. I don't know what the right answer is. Yeah. But I am willing to say you have to make a treaty that you can actually enforce. Like if there's no leverage that the other one has over the other, how can we actually enforce it? And so that would be my 1 cent of feedback to that. Yeah,
that's good. I think a lot of folks are disconnected from the reality of how the system is set up or operates in Afghanistan. And these folks have been doing this for thousands of years, and they don't play by the same rules that the West plays by necessarily.
No, and actually, I believe I read an article just a few days ago that they've already called the treaty off. They being the Taliban.
Sure. Sure they have.
Something got them mad, and they're like, nope, game on.
Yeah, we're not doing that. We're not doing that anymore. Oh, right. Boy. Well, I guess we'll see how it goes. I know a lot of folks are pretty excited about it, but I guess we'll see how it goes. So getting back to our discussion, I just thought I'd throw that out there. Getting back to our discussion. So you came back home from that deployment. How much longer were you in the Marine Corps after you returned home?
Got back in February, punched out on terminal leave in July. So just a few months. Came home, pretty sure we got my wife pregnant the night I got home. Sure. And so we were with child when we separated. I came back, 5th Battalion, 10th Marines, which was my parent battalion, actually got folded up, got deactivated, and so we all got transferred back over across some of the other battalions within 10th Marines. And so I was able to finish up my time as a headquarters battery XO, and had great support from the battalion staff when it came to the transition out.
Yeah. Talk about your transition a little bit. You transitioned from the Marine Corps into a media marketing company. What did your transition look like, and how do you go from being an artillery officer to overseeing media and the various aspects of that?
And it's actually not nearly as straight of a line as you just made it sound. It was actually quite a windy road.
Right.
Yeah. So, and I'll try not take too long, because I mean this could turn into quite a story. But we're really trying to figure out where we wanted to go. So first you got to figure out your geography when you're getting ready to separate. Like, okay, where do I want to go? Do I want to go to someplace new? Do I want to move back to where my parents are, or my wife's family, or do we just want to go start something completely over from zero? We knew we were really trying to stay in the South, as far as Texas. My wife's originally from San Antonio. I'd heard great things about Texas. I don't think I'd ever been. I think I'd hit a layover here or there in DFW, but that was about it. And I enlisted the help of some of the big 3, 4 JMO headhunter placement firms out there that really aggressively target us, that are coming up on our first 4 years. Worked with those guys, attended a conference. Every single one of my job offers was coming out of Houston. So Houston, we went. Had a great time in Houston. I was working in the oil and gas industry. That entire time, I've actually been a very active member in the startup community, and so I was fortunate enough to be involved in a couple of startups. One was a technology startup, and you're not getting hardly paid anything. It's all sweat, and it's an amazing experience, because you're working with a really small team of very passionate, very highly intelligent, and capable people. And so I had a great time doing that. That kind of opened my eyes to how startups and how companies get off the ground. And so I've went on to do that a few times. Moved up to Dallas Fort Worth actually just a few years ago. Took a position up here with a company, and I'd actually started a web design firm on the side. That was really kind of how I got my start. And in fact, I was even doing website design when I was in Afghanistan on SIPRNet. I had a couple of the colonels and generals want me to build their little battle dashboards for them. And so, I mean, it's just kind of funny how things kind of transpire, right? So what started off as a hobby, and that's all it was just a hobby to make a few extra bucks building websites for people, ended up getting a lot more traction, and people enjoyed doing business with me, love my ethics and my approach to people, and how I love on people and focus on solving their problems, not just what's in it for me. I ended up getting headhunted actually out of that role to lead a technology startup. So I had to kind of suspend ops on that one for a little while. Once that technology startup kind of got moving and the ownership team and I decided to part ways, I was able to go back. I was able to go back into media, and so that's where Bold Media kind of came into existence. And so, doing obviously more than websites, we're taking care of advertising and social media content and copy and logos and branding and some of the big brainiac type of stuff, and helping consult people on how to best position their brand in the market.
It's crazy how, what we do in kind of our professional life becomes our passion. So that then transitioned to you caring for veterans who are transitioning into business, and then working more and more with veterans in business and getting into business and, interested in business. So how did you go from you're invested in these startups, you're doing, that kind of work, you've moved around a little bit, and you see the need for someone to be a voice for veterans in the business world or getting into the business world. Again, it seems, and I know I can make it a nice smooth transition, and I know it doesn't work exactly that way,
Sure.
But how do you make that transition from this is what I'm doing to I need to include other people in this?
Yeah. It just goes back to purpose. It goes back to your passion. It goes back to the things that you believe you're called to do. And it's more than just yourself, right? We want to build things that include others. I'm not in it just for my own welfare. Obviously, I need to take care of myself and take care of my basic needs, take care of my family. But more so, and this is how legacies are built, right? You're caring for other people, you're building something that will outlast you. And so that's kind of where the podcast idea came from. I, to be honest, even since I separated back in 2012, I was getting phone calls from guys. Most of these guys I didn't even know. They were friends of friends. I mean, you know how the Marine Corps community is. If we don't know each other, we definitely know somebody mutually.
Right.
And I'd get calls from guys asking me for help with their resume, or asking me about opportunities in the Houston area. And I always took my time with those guys to say, hey, this is what you need to tighten up. If you are willing to receive criticism, I will make your resume bleed, because I've had some amazing people take the time to do that for me. And I know how valuable it was, how good I thought my resume was, and how bad it actually was. And so kind of putting that care back into somebody, and you can tell the people that really do appreciate it, because they don't get offended when you point things out. They welcome that kind of criticism because they know it makes them better. But the podcast idea really just came as the result of, I don't run a national veterans nonprofit. There's plenty of those. There's actually plenty of podcasts out there already that deal specifically with the transition, that deal with war stories. I mean, there's several niches out there. For me, the whole crux of that podcast, and it's been taken off here pretty quick, has been capturing the stories of people and understanding their struggles, understanding the things that they've had to endure and go through, how it made them better, what they learned from it, and how they've gotten to where they are today. And I don't care if you're a drug pop PFC that punched out, or you're a career sergeant major or general and you punched out. It doesn't matter. Some of these stories will connect with you in some way, and I've already seen that. And so it comes back to, man, if this guy or this lady can do this, I can do it. It's not totally hopeless and pointless. And so that's really the crux of the podcast, is really just to serve as a guiding light. I don't pretend to teach. In fact, I don't do a whole lot of speaking. I just try to ask questions and get them to talk.
Yeah.
And but with the hope being that there may be a nugget of wisdom shared during that interview that would be of value to you. So,
what are some of the unique challenges that you've seen or heard from people transitioning out of the military? That's one part of the question. The second part of the question is, can you speak to the transition from the military into civilian life, maybe more specifically into business life? I think for us, one of the things that we see probably more than anything is that the transition is what's killing people. There's trauma, there's all the other stuff that we talk about, but often it's the transition, whether it's a retired transition or just a transition out of the military because your end of active service has come. Can you talk about those two things? So the transition, and then some of the unique challenges related to business for veterans and those coming out of the military.
Sure. Yeah, and really there are a lot of one and the same. And if I don't do a good job answering either part of your question, please reattack at the end of this.
You can do whatever you want. That's the great thing about this environment. You can say anything you want to say. I do it all the time.
That's great, Jeremy. Thanks. The transition is 100% mental. It's a very emotional process, very, very emotional process. We do a great job of stuffing our emotions in a bag and locking it down. We get told that. We get trained to do that, for crying out loud. You get into a war zone. I'm sure you personally can speak to this.
Sure.
As some of the horrors and some of the things that you've seen. It doesn't even have to be war. It could be in training. It could be something just crazy that you dealt with during Weekend Liberty.
Right.
And you come from a sense of brotherhood. You come from this sense of this community, this higher service, this higher calling. I'm serving something much bigger than me. I'm serving, it's the Bible, apple pie, and grandma. And, it's got much more meaning to you. And when you get out, you kind of get hit in the face with this reality that, man, these corporations, they do appreciate my service. They recognize the hardships and the sacrifices that I made. That's about it.
Yeah.
and that's a hard pill to swallow for some folks, and it can take years to get through that, because you realize now, like, well, wait a second, I led a company of Marines, or I was a battalion commander, or I was senior enlisted advisor at the MAG level, or whatever the case may be. And in some cases, you're able to land a role of similar impact, but most of the time that's not the case. And so it becomes how big of a team player can I become? What can I contribute? How can I serve? And I'm telling you, the theme I keep going back to is it's a process. It's a process, and I would also kind of almost equate it to like a bit of a mourning process. You're mourning the loss of this fraternity of service members, and some of the advice that I've heard just in the course of doing the podcast has been, get involved, like get into community. Find your circle of veterans in your local community, either at the city level, or if you're out in the country, get a regional level or state level, something. Get plugged in, and don't be afraid to ask for help, because I don't think I was really ready, because I was so blown away by how supportive the veterans community was when I got out. It was much stronger than I realized. And once I started to kind of get plugged in a little bit, I was like, wow, this is a pretty cool thing.
Do you think the military sets transitioning service members up for failure a little bit? When I was leaving the Marine Corps, I left. Now I had a job that I was transitioning into, so it wasn't a huge concern of mine, but as I sat through the classes and did the stuff you're supposed to do, I heard the message that just about every employer outside the gates of Camp Pendleton is waiting for you. There's a job waiting for you. People are going to be excited to have you. And then in our organization, thousands of veterans have come through our organization, and we have these conversations. I thought when I left the military, there would be jobs waiting for me. There were, but they weren't what I thought. Do you think the military could do a better job, maybe that's a better way to ask it, of preparing people for kind of what you just described?
Yeah, and I certainly can't speak to the way they're doing it now, because I mean, it's been it's like the other day. It's been 7.5 years, almost 8 years.
And I transitioned out in 2003, by the way. So
okay,
it may have changed.
So I mean, my hope is that it has changed, because I do believe there has been a bit of that rip current related to the transition. Is that, man, they're not only are they lined up outside the gate, but they all have 6-figure job offers waiting for you. Yeah. And they cannot wait to get their hands on you.
There's a vice presidency for you somewhere out there, right?
Exactly right. And that's certainly not the case. It's absolutely not the case. And in many cases, you're taking a pay cut. Sometimes it's comparable, but for a lot of folks, you're going to take a little bit of a haircut coming out, depending on what the opportunity is. And you just have to have the mindset of, is this a macro level opportunity? Is this like a management trainee, like pipeline that I'm working my way through? If you can kind of understand a little bit of the career progression for the next couple of years, then maybe it becomes palatable. But the reality is, at least when I went through, I'll just speak for that. I'm not sure it did a great job. But at the same time, it has to start sooner. And I think we talk about that a lot. So, I mean, just pick on me, just as an easy example. I come back off deployment. By the time I get off of post-deployment leave, we do all the post-deployment training. We do all the crazy stuff we got to do on the back end of a year-long deployment. Then we chop back to our units and all that stuff. That's probably another 30 to 45 days post-deployment. And so that puts me, I'm like 4 months away from transition. It needs to start sooner, but the problem is you're so committed to what you're doing. You're so invested into the here and now of, man, this is my job, this is my duty, these are my Marines, this is my unit, and nobody's coaching you and saying, hey man, you need to be networking with people in your desired geography at least a year out. You need to start blowing up social media and start networking with people and getting people on the phone and there's a bit of us, I think, and I'll speak for me, that you almost feel like you're betraying your service, or that you're not doing the utmost of what you're supposed to do. It's almost like you're sandbagging it. You're like, well, I'm gonna go work the phones and try to, and not focus on my job. And so I think there's a little bit of that stigma that needs to get crushed.
We talk often about identity as it relates to the transition. Sometimes, and I can't speak for all the services, but I know certainly in the Marine Corps and in areas of the other services as well, there's such a strong identity with what I do and who I am. I was having this conversation yesterday with someone who said this idea that once a Marine, always a Marine has not helped me outside of the Marine Corps, because there's such a strong identity with I'm still that, I am that thing, I am that uniform, I am that service, and I appreciate the once a Marine, always a Marine.
Sure.
But there is something that comes along with that. And we talk about this often in terms of relationships and just the health of your life outside of the military. How does that identity, not just mourning the loss of the fraternity and the connections in that, but how does that identity, when it's carried over into the business world or into the working world, impact the folks who are trying to transition out?
I'm smiling because I could probably talk about this for the next 3 hours with very little pause.
It's a big issue. I think it's one of the biggest issues that we deal with.
It's the single biggest issue. It is the root issue. If you want to do a root cause analysis, it is misplaced identity. And speaking as a believer, knowing where my identity comes from. So my identity is not derived from what I do. It's who I am as a son of God, and how I move through that, and how I host God's presence in all that I do. So whether that's in my community, whether that's at church, whether that's at the soccer field, whether that's in business at a conference room, understanding where your identity is derived and where it comes from. And that is a journey that took me several years. I mean, I was on that journey for many, many years. And it kind of came to a head because I thought, well, crap, maybe I just need to go back in. Maybe I just, and I may or may not have applied to several different other government agencies. I may or may not have actually made some headway into those while also pursuing some other opportunities at the same time. And really, I mean, it came as a result of prayer. God didn't give me a peace over some of these other opportunities that I was chasing. I was well qualified. I would have had a great time doing. Probably would have crushed my family. And it's funny, God kind of tends to know what's better for you, because he's constantly he's shaping you and molding you into His image. Yep. And so how does that translate into business? I always do business in the way of, okay, like I'm working for the King, and so how can I best steward what I've been given? It's not even mine. And so having a much larger mindset and a much larger view of things, it changes your perspective. Like your house, now you view your house and your finances and your car and your kids and your wife and the list goes on, right? I'm stewarding. These are gifts that I've been given, I've been trusted with. And if I want more, I need to steward what I have with excellence, with such excellence that you could eat off the floor. We certainly don't want to get off into a performance-based mindset and performance-based relationship. But no, it's absolutely that journey of identity. And if you grapple with that journey, it's a beautiful place to be. God is more interested in your process than He is in your end result. And so there's several books that I ended up reading. There's some people that I pulled in really close to me when I was really suffering and struggling my way through it, and kind of sharing my heart with people, because what I did was who I was. That's how I viewed it. And I even made the analogy of, like, it's like a pro football player that's all he's been, man, his entire life. He's just played ball. He's like he was an amazing athlete at a young age, got highlighted, kept pursuing it. He's playing at the highest level, plays 3 seasons, and he's gone. Now what? And for me, it kind of felt similar. I'd grown up in this military family for literally my entire life. I didn't know anything other than military. And it was only for like a 2-year break between my father's retirement and me starting college. And so for me mentally, there was no break. And when I got done, I was like, man, all I've been has been a military person. Now what? And that was a scary thought, man. It's a scary thought when the monitor or the detailer tells you, hey, you've got 3 options. This is your next duty station. One of these options is really bad. It's a career killer. So you really got 2 options, and you choose left or right. It kind of doesn't matter. Now it's like the world is your oyster.
Right.
Do with it whatever you want, and choose whatever you want. So.
Yeah, when I told you I went to Devil Pups, that was kind of the thing that got me, right? That was when I was 14. From the time I was 14 until the time I was commissioned, my whole life was pointing toward that. That's all I had ever wanted to do. So, yeah, the transition out is crazy, and your identity, whether you want it to be wrapped up in that or not, it just is until you have a very real understanding or encounter with who you actually are. Yeah. Was your faith something that was developed later in life, or do you come from a home where that was something that was talked about when you were younger? And when did you come into that relationship with Christ?
That's a great question, and thanks for asking it. For me, I would say I accepted Christ at a very young age. I was probably, 5 or 6 years old. Grew up in a Christian family. My parents obviously were they did the very best they could, and I thought they were phenomenal parents to me. Raised me in a really good home. Obviously the separations from my father were really, really hard on me. The older I got, those really did mess me up a little bit. And but I've got such a great relationship with both my parents to this day. My parents have been married for, I don't even know how many years now, like 25 some odd years, maybe longer. Sorry, Mom and Dad, if you're watching. But they really instilled a lot of that. They modeled that faith for me. But I got to be real with you though, because I don't really think I owned my own faith, like 100%, until I was probably about 20 years old, or no, 22. I never, like, I'll never say I wasn't a Christian, because I absolutely believe with all my heart that I was a Christ follower from the time I was 5 all the way up. But I certainly, there was a few years there I was dealing with some pretty big challenges within my own life. And it starts to get inside your head a little bit. It starts to make you doubt your salvation, starts to get you to doubt your standing with God. And once again, it's this mind game, right? But no, faith has played a huge part of my life. And I'm so thankful to God for every opportunity I've been given. And I just pray that I continue to steward everything He gives me well.
Yeah. You talk about your identity and how your identity is found in Christ, and that's where it needs to be. Couldn't agree with you more. Apart from identity, you said that faith has been very important. Can you highlight a few things? This is why faith is important. Our last episode of this show, this last week, we talked about faith, and that was our entire conversation. I think a lot of folks have a hard time understanding why faith is important. We say faith has impacted my life. It's so important to my life. It's been important to my life. And people who haven't been raised in a home or raised in this environment where they understand faith, they think that it's, well, if you believe, then God gives you stuff. Faith brings you peace when there's no peace. And if you have to believe in something, then that's great for you. But it's really much more than that. It's much deeper than that. Yeah. Highlight a few of the areas that you'd say, this is why faith is important to me. If you had to explain this to someone, this is why faith is important.
Well, first, God doesn't owe you anything.
Yeah.
And the minute you figure that one out, it'll really set a lot of things free in your life. You might be saying to yourself, but I'm managing my money well, I'm managing my clients well, I'm a good husband, I'm a good father. So God, surely I have earned my way to a massive windfall. Nope. Doesn't work like that. Wish it did, but it actually, I'm glad it doesn't, because now we're putting ourselves into this performance-based mindset, this performance-based relationship. Now, faith is not this thing that you incorporate into your life. It's not this concept. It's not this idea that you sprinkle in to what you do. It simply is who you are. And so I can't separate my faith from who I am, because that's simply who I am. And so when I go and I do a business deal with somebody, I'm looking out for their best interest. I'm looking out for a way to make this mutually beneficial. Do you see the value that I'm adding to you? Great. Well, it's got a dollar figure attached to that. Do we agree that that's fair? And so it's treating people fair. I mean, loving people. I've had people just cry with me over the phone about things that are going on in their life. Like we'll stop what we're doing. Like, I'm not out to like arm wrestle you into a business deal. That's not what I'm about. And so we'll talk about, a death in the family, or maybe their marriage is on the rocks, and just loving people. And so I think it just blows people's minds when you're not, like, you don't have to have the Christian label, I guess is what I'm saying. Because it simply is who you are. And so the way that you carry yourself, the way you conduct business, it should speak volumes. There should be something different about you. There should be something attractive about you that maybe I can't put my finger on it, man, but something about you is different. Like there's something about you that I don't understand. I get that all the time. And I laugh because, I'll have non-believers that I'm talking to. They're like, man, Aaron, there's just something about you. I don't know what it is. And without being weird about it, we may or may not get on to discussion of faith, and I allow God to open those opportunities up, and, I steward those opportunities wisely. And so I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it's great. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about that. And I believe that without faith, we can't find the healing and the hope and the purpose and the direction that so many people want, and particularly for those of us that work with veterans who are struggling with transition and identity, and they've made some bad decisions because they're struggling with those things. So now they have another whole set of issues that they're dealing with. I don't think there is a path forward apart from faith. And I think faith can't, as you mentioned, be a part of it. It has to be who you are. It's the foundation that the rest of it is built on. But a lot of folks misunderstand that, and they think, well, if I believe more, if I hope more, if I invest more, if I work harder, then God may reward me, and hopefully all of these things will come back together. But that's not what it's about. It's about an authentic relationship.
And if I can jump in here too, it's all to bring Him glory. It's all to point back to Him. And what we want to do though as business people, God does want you to do well. Like, so there's nothing inherently evil about wealth. There's nothing evil about these things. It's, in fact, you're bringing glory to your Father when you are succeeding. And right. So, and it comes back to like, okay, well, I've got these decisions to make. I've got left, I can go left, I can go right. They both seem to be okay. What do I do? What does God want me to do? Like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. And people freak out. Yeah. And, God has given you a choice. And so if neither one of those options goes contrary to His word, if you don't feel this just unbelievable, just like storm inside of you that is just raging about one of the options, or you don't feel this abundant peace over one of your choices, then that simply tells me that he is taking pleasure in you as a son or daughter to choose. He wants you to choose. He didn't make robots. I mean, he wants us to willingly love and worship Him. And likewise, there's a lot of decisions we make in our life that he takes delight in seeing us make choices. It's just like your kids, right? Your kids, you want your kids eventually to one day make decisions on their own and to do a great job. And you know what? It makes you look really good as a father. And so like, how can we bring our Father glory when we're asking Him, which shoe do I wear today? Or, which car do I buy? It's like, I appreciate the heart behind it all. But you're missing this concept of sonship and walking in. Again, it goes back to your identity in Christ, is knowing who you are as a son or daughter of God. So.
Yeah. There is another concept that's tied to this one, and I'd like to ask this question and have this discussion, but it's around the concept of hope and the idea of hope. And faith and hope are conjoined. I don't believe you can have one without the other. When you're talking to people who are without hope, and that's one of the things in our community, I think we find people often who are without hope. And I define that as, hopelessness is looking at the world that you're standing in. And so if you draw a circle around yourself, the things within that circle, that's all there is. There's nothing else outside of that. That's hopeless. And I think a lot of people find themselves there. I'm sure in business people find themselves in a hopeless place. When you talk to those who, you may not say you're hopeless, but you can perceive there's not a lot of hope here.
Yeah.
How do you communicate hope to that person? Where is hope found for those who desperately need some hope?
It's a simple change in belief. It's a simple change in your circumstance. It's 100%. I mean, I think I mentioned this really like at the very beginning, but it's 100% a battle in your mind. And so offering a different perspective than what they've seen. Obviously what their perspective and their reality is making them believe that it is hopeless. When I get an opportunity to speak into a situation like that and to speak hope and to speak truth and to speak love into these situations, it's all about challenging the status quo. And okay, if this is what we believe, then this is going to lead to X, Y, and Z. But again, it's just these little small shifts in people's brains. Yeah. You make a small adjustment. I don't have a good example for you, but you make a small adjustment in the way that someone perceives a problem or perceives there to be hopelessness. And what I've seen a lot of is a lot of folks think that they're in it by themselves, that they struggle with some of these issues by themselves. And that's a great weapon to get used on you is if I can isolate you. I mean, the spiritual and the way that we do physical a lot of times can line up. It's like, we want to fix and flank and maneuver, and that's how we can take care of our enemy. And likewise, we can get targeted and find ourselves in life where we're fixed in place and we're getting beat up from every side. And but we've been fed a whole bunch of lies. And to understand, how much power you have. There's nothing more depressing than a Christian who hasn't fully stepped into what they believe and into their authority. And I just simply like to just challenge people's belief. And they don't have to be a believer, by the way. Like, I speak to a lot of non-believers, and just, again, getting them out of the mindset, getting them out of focusing on within and inside themselves and looking outward, and letting them understand how much value you have and how much you bring to bear to your organization or to your family. Like, you mean a lot to your family. You mean a lot to your community. You've got friends and people that count on you. You make a much bigger impact in your company than you think that you do. And to get them to reflect and to realize that.
That's great. Yeah, perspective is everything. Seeing things clearly and seeing things well. And sometimes you need people on the outside to help with that, which again is why we do this show. And I think that's why you do the Veterans Business Podcast, is to give a different perspective on where people sit.
For sure.
Awesome. Where can people find your podcast? Where can people find out more about you and follow the work that you're doing and connect? Maybe they're veterans, maybe they're not, but they're interested in your work.
Yeah, I've actually had a few non-veterans reach out about the podcast, which has been cool.
Yeah, very cool.
The podcast can be found on literally just about every major podcast platform. So Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google, the list goes on. You can find it. You could actually just do a search for my name, and it should pop up. If not, do the Veterans Business Podcast. If you want to learn more about what I do as a company, and the company I lead is called Bold Media. You simply go to boldmedia.us. And so it goes back to being bold. I mean, we love to boldly represent our clients, but I believe God's called me to live a bold life and to take chance and to be willing to risk. And that comes from being bold. And so that's a little bit of the story behind the name. So that's
awesome. Well, for those that are watching, please take some time to go and find out more about Aaron and the podcast as well. And I've listened to a number of those, and they're just great. Great conversations, and as you mentioned, those nuggets of wisdom and truth that come out are fantastic. So check those out, and would love to, Aaron, connect again and talk more about some of these other things. It's always fun to have the first conversation, and then you can come back a second time, and we can dive deeper into some of this stuff.
Sure.
So.
No, it's been a sincere pleasure, Jeremy. I really appreciate you reaching out. Thanks for having me on. It's been a blast.
Yeah, fantastic, and we'll do it again. For those of you that are watching, thank you for watching. For those that are listening, go watch and go over to YouTube, and you can find us there. Look for the Mighty Oak Show. You find our channel, And as I mentioned at the beginning, we've got tons of content. We have wonderful stories of individuals who have gone through the process of transitioning or dealing with trauma, just about every imaginable situation you can find, and stories of redemption and hope. Those are found there, as well as the various shows that we do, a lot of other content that we put out. And we'd love to share that with you. Please subscribe if you have not on YouTube. You can also hit that notification bell so that you know when other content comes online. And for those that are listening in other places, thank you for listening, and we look forward to talking with you next time. I appreciate the perspective that Aaron brings to this conversation. When we were closing, I mentioned to him that often on this show we talk about trauma and difficulty and life challenges and healing and restoration and redemption and all those things. And those are very, very important things to talk about. But to hear Aaron's story, where he really did have a solid foundation going into the military. He came from a military family, and one that also lifted up faith. This put him in a good place, and really a very natural transition into the military, then transitioning out, and had his ups and downs, of course. But I love the perspective of stepping out of the military and saying, what's next for me, and following that road where it leads, and then finding the place that he believes God would have him to be. And now, not just in business and making money for himself and his family, but giving back to the veteran community and helping folks. What a great perspective. And I appreciate that from him. He mentioned a few things as we close up today that I just draw your attention to. Again, sometimes the salient points of a conversation can get lost in the hour-long conversation. So a couple of things that Aaron said that really jumped out at me, and I think should to you as well. We talked for just a moment on this idea of identity. And Aaron said I could spend a couple hours talking about this. This is everything, and man, in my own life, this is something that I have struggled with, and I've shared that before on this show and others. That idea that I am not what I did, I'm not the uniform that I wore, I'm not the people that I used to spend time with, and as much as I appreciate all of those things, that's not who I am. My identity needs to be found in something that is concrete, something that is solid. Aaron mentioned this, in having a relationship with God. God is outside of time and space. He's outside of what's happening in my life and what's happening in my world. And therefore, if my identity is found in Him, and scriptures talk about this as well, but if my identity is found in Him, then when I change jobs, when I change careers, when things in my life go up or down, and there's all of these shifting scenarios over the course of life, when that happens, my identity doesn't change. Because my identity is solid. My identity is fixed. And because it's fixed, I can move from one phase of life, one stage of life, one situation in life, a high that's become a low. I can continue to transition because I know who I am. And I can appreciate the things that I've done. I can appreciate the jobs that I've had and the places I've been. But those things don't identify me. Identity is so important. We talked as well for some time about transition. And every transition in life brings its own unique set of challenges. I won't say difficulties, they're not always difficult, but sometimes they are. Challenges for sure. And as we transition out of the military into a civilian role, whether that's another job or some just a role outside of the military, that period of transition can be a challenge. And often it requires patience to get from where I was to where I will eventually end up. And again, having that identity fixed allows me to patiently move through that process of transition. Transition is not something that only folks coming from a military place experience. Folks who are transitioning from one job to another, from one relationship to another, from a business career into the phase that we call retirement. Whatever it is, there are a lot of transitions in life. And when we hit those transitions, we need to be patient, having our identity fixed, and move through those. We talked about that. The last thing we kind of ended with was this idea of perspective. And how often in life what we need is a new perspective. I like to talk about hope. I talk about hope often because I really believe that without hope, apart from hope, separated from hope, we're stuck at the very best. I mean, that's the best we can get without hope, is I'm just stuck. And at the very least, we become depressed and despondent and find ourselves in a place of despair where we no longer want to go forward. And that has real ramifications for folks. Hope is absolutely necessary. It's necessary because we have to understand that what we're dealing with right now is not all there is, that there's something beyond this. Aaron mentioned this idea that sometimes hopelessness comes because we feel like we're the only ones going through this. And man, I have absolutely experienced that. Perhaps you have as well. But we feel like we're the only ones who are going through this. No one else knows what it's like to be me. And sometimes what we need is a new perspective. Again, Aaron mentioned this a few times. There's a lot of mental in this, right? Our mental attitude and how we think about things and how we perceive things really determine for us in a lot of ways whether we'll have hope and move forward or not. We need perspective. And so often what we need to gain perspective is an outsider's view. It's someone else looking at us and saying, hey, let me give you a new perspective. It's understanding when someone comes along and they say, I've been there. I know where you are. I've experienced that. That gives us a different perspective. Perhaps it's a show like this or a podcast like Aaron's. It's getting outside of ourselves, outside of our head, outside of our situation, and understanding there's more to life than this. Perspective, identity, transition, and perspective. These are some great takeaways, and I hope that you will go and check out Aaron's podcast, the Veterans Business Podcast. Check that out, and the work that he's doing. Fantastic work. Thankful again for your time, and if you have not yet subscribed, please do that. Hit the notification bell. I remind folks all the time to do this because it's very important you do that. That lets you know when new content comes online, and we're putting content on our channel all of the time. I know that because I'm involved in a lot of it. All the time we're putting stuff out there that hopefully will be a help to you. For those of you that are listening somewhere else, appreciate it. For those of you that are watching, thank you, and we'll talk to you again soon.